Welcome, everybody, to the Canadian Podcast. I'm Andrew Campbell, and here with me, as always, my fabulous and fantastic co-host, Sarah Sash. Sarah, how's things on the West Coast?
Oh, not too bad. It's so lovely that it's sunny out. I see. We know that you maybe have switched to your lighter slippers for the summertime season.
It's just, do I have socks with my slippers or no socks with my slippers? It's very complicated here in the barn office.
Well, you have a very nice background there in your barn office, and I noticed that we have a parallel podcast, you could say. There's a French version of the podcast, different host, Alain Lemieux over at Entre Deux Traites. He has a beautiful background of the virtual nature, I noticed. And I was like, oh, here's me with my bare wall and him with his beautiful, cow scene, and it says Entre Deux Traites up in the corner. And I was like, oh, I am underperforming.
Well, maybe that's the thing. Maybe every episode we should change your background and we'll put something else in fancy. The one that always got, I don't do it as much anymore, but before, when I didn't have the barnboard wall, my background was I had a picture from in a tractor cab that made me look like I was sitting in the tractor cab.
It always looked like you were working.
Well, you know what? And I only did it because every time I got on a conference call actually from the tractor, people sounded so much more impressed that I was working. So then I just pretended to do it all the time. It worked really well.
You're like, yeah, this is also work, but
I kind of thought that, but if it's better, then sure, let's do that. So
yeah, it makes you look good. So today, Andrew, we're diving into one of the biggest shifts actually facing Canadian dairy producers, not a tractor shift, but a shift in the industry. And we're talking about going into 2026 with the growing focus on protein.
Yeah, because across the food landscape, protein has become this nutrient consumers can't seem to get enough of, whether it's driven by health, fitness goals, weight management trends, social media craze, whatever it is. Protein is definitely the buzzword, and I know I've heard it at every dairy meeting I've been at this winter.
Well, we're pretty fortunate in the dairy industry. We can actually produce really affordable protein because we'll notice that protein is getting so expensive also. So as a result, the food industry is racing to respond to the protein craze, often in places where protein was never the main attraction. I've seen protein ice cream, protein waffles, protein pancakes, all the things, and the claims are everywhere.
Protein ice cream. That seems like exactly the food trend I want to get on. But it is one of those things that because dairy products, of course, have always been this naturally excellent source of high-quality protein, it puts the dairy sector in a very strong position to respond to this shift in consumer demand. The question is no longer whether dairy can deliver the protein, but how it should do so. It's moved beyond just being the simple nutritional attribute, and it's now the marketing strategy, a product differentiator, a major force shaping how foods are formulated, priced, promoted. As you said, the marketing on everything now says protein.
Mm-hmm. And with the new milk pricing structures coming into effect in April across both Eastern and Western Canada, I honestly think we could have a whole separate episode just on pricing structures. Protein is quickly becoming the component that drives opportunity. So today we're going to have a number of experts on to speak about the protein market, to see how we on farm can work as an industry to capitalize on it, to do the best thing by our cows, by our neighbors, all the stuff.
And that is coming up right now here on the Canadian Podcast.
Our first guest today is Isabelle Naderer, Director, Nutrition and Research for the Dairy Farmers of Canada. Isabelle, welcome to the Canadian Podcast.
Thank you, Sarah, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be with you today.
Well, we're really excited to have you because we've been talking about protein. It seems to have become very popular lately, but we always are talking about the cow side. We haven't had a lot of opportunity to talk about the human side, so this is going to be great. We're seeing a lot more and more protein-enriched foods showing up in grocery store shelves, from snacks to beverages. Can you kind of take us through this trend and explain what's really driving this growing interest in protein among consumers?
Sure, and you're right. I mean, protein is a nutrient that's very popular these days, and we see more and more foods enriched with protein on the market. And this is really happening because the food sector is responding to consumer interest for protein. For the past 5 years, protein has become the number one nutrient that consumers are seeking because they associate protein with health. And according to the most recent survey by the International Food Information Council, the claimed good source of protein on food labels that we see has risen to the top of the list of criteria that define a healthy food in the mind of consumers. So really, protein is associated with health. And in my opinion, there are many factors behind this trend. Social media has certainly amplified the trend, but there is a scientific basis behind it. The first thing is that a higher protein intake is linked to better satiety and weight management, something that popular low carb and high protein diets have capitalized on in recent years. Protein is also a part of every cell in our body, so it's important for optimal growth and development, and that's more and more recognized among the public. Protein is also associated with healthy aging, and we know that the population is aging, and so there's greater interest there. Protein is important for bone health. It's an important component of our bones. We think of calcium, but bones also require protein, and protein helps maintain muscle mass as we age, which is crucial for maintaining strength, balance, and preventing falls. And having a good muscle mass is also associated with better blood sugar control and a reduced risk of diabetes. And it's also associated with greater longevity. So the health professional community is generally supporting the importance of getting enough protein in their recommendations to the public, particularly for certain segments of the populations that have higher protein intakes and are more at risk of inadequate intakes.
These all sound like pretty good things.
Yes, definitely. And more recently, the growing popularity of weight loss drugs such as Ozempic has really emphasized the importance of protein in minimizing muscle loss during weight loss. So these drugs will likely amplify the trend even further going forward.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask, is we do hear a lot about it for sure. And so I think on the industry side, dairy industry I'm speaking of, we're kind of wondering if this is a long-term shift in eating habits or if it's more of a short-term trend fueled by marketing and social media and all the things we're seeing. We don't really know when we're adapting our herds what to expect in terms of whether this is here to stay or if it's just a temporary kind of blip and we'll be on to the next thing.
This is a tough question to answer because food trends are often really difficult to predict. And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball.
Oh, come on.
But this trend, I would say, has emerged about 5 years ago, and it's showing no sign of slowing down. Actually, it's still growing. And it's also supported by a growing interest in research and also by the health professional community, as I mentioned earlier. And older adults are also a growing segment of the population. And we know there's a big emphasis on protein whenever we talk about the healthy eating for older adults. So it's reasonable to assume that this trend is here to stay for a while longer, at least. How long, that's hard to predict.
From a nutritional standpoint, then, are people actually lacking protein in their diets leading up to now, or is this something that's kind of being overemphasized in the current food landscape?
In reality, it's not difficult to meet our protein needs without resorting to supplements or fortified foods. Generally, eating a varied diet is enough, and most people meet their protein requirements. But there are segments of the population that are at risk of protein inadequacy. For instance, older adults who have low appetites and eat very little, and yet have higher protein requirements than the rest of the adult population. Women also who are concerned about their weight, who skip meals, don't have breakfast, or eat very little. So often we see women who survive on salads, essentially. Well, they can be at risk of protein, too low protein intakes. And also children who are picky eaters are an at-risk category. Also, vegetarians, vegans, and flexitarians who don't adequately replace animal-based foods can be at risk. And lastly, athletes and very active people who restrict their diet to achieve what I call aesthetic standards. As you probably know, athletes can have much higher protein requirements than the average population. So if they restrict their intake, that can be a problem. That being said, according to protein experts, the current protein requirements are considered too low for optimal health. In fact, the protein requirements represent only the minimum amount of protein that we need to survive, not an optimal amount for optimal health. So protein experts nowadays feel that there are benefits to consuming slightly more than the official recommendations dictate.
So that was my next question. With so many protein enriched and fortified products available, and the marketing that goes with them, of course, I'm wondering how consumers should approach these foods. Because honestly, I was just at Costco last night with my boys who are teenagers. It feels like you could walk through the front two aisles and it's all various protein choices in some liquid or powder form, and potentially you could just live on those things. Like the way that it's being marketed, it seems like everybody is just filling their cart with this stuff, and it's not really including all of the fulsome scope of foods that you're talking about. So are they generally beneficial, or should people be cautious about relying on them? It seems like you could live your whole day just on these things.
Yes, you're right. There's been an explosion of protein-enriched products on the market, and many of these options are not really nutritious. Currently, we have foods like cookies and candies and snack foods that are now fortified with protein and many other non-nutrient poor foods. And also, the amount of protein that is added in some of these foods is quite high. So several dietitians have started to express concern lately and are urging consumers to be cautious because we can't have too much of a good thing. There are risks associated with overconsumption of protein. First, it's important to know that the body has a maximum capacity to utilize the protein that we consume at each meal, and any protein beyond that point is no longer useful for muscle building or other bodily functions. So our body converts that excess protein into sugar, or even worse, it ends up in our love handles. Sorry. And and also too much protein doesn't promote a balanced diet. If you overload on protein, you're less hungry for other foods. Protein is very satiating, so that can lead to an unbalanced diet and nutritional deficiencies down the road, especially if you choose low nutrient protein-enriched foods. And thirdly, excess protein consumption can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease because it promotes the formation of atherosclerosis in the arteries. And last but not least, it can also accelerate the progression of kidney problems in people who have an undiagnosed renal condition that's called renal insufficiency, and there's about 10% of the population that is walking around with an undiagnosed renal insufficiency, so they could aggravate their condition. So I'm a big advocate of everything in moderation.
Not just every protein. So when it comes specifically to dairy protein, what sets them apart from other protein sources, and what are some of the unique nutritional benefits that we can find in dairy protein products?
Dairy proteins are really interesting, particularly nowadays, because people are no longer just asking themselves how much protein they should consume. They are also asking which type of protein is best for them. And this is where I think dairy products can truly stand out. Dairy products contain what's called high quality complete protein, and that means that dairy protein contains all the essential amino acids in the right proportions that our body need, and also that means that they're particularly effective for building and maintaining muscle and bone mass and being used in the body to the fullest. And milk is also very nutritious. It's a source of 15 essential nutrients, and many of these nutrients are found in insufficient amounts in a good proportion of the population in Canada. So protein-enriched dairy products, such as milk that has a higher protein content or Greek yogurt with added protein, these foods are particularly good options for providing a protein boost because dairy products provide many other nutrients that people need beside protein.
So, for listeners who are trying to make informed choices, which is getting incredibly more complicated at the grocery store, I'm wondering what practical advice you could give when it comes to incorporating protein into your daily diet in a balanced and healthy kind of way.
I would favor a balanced approach. I think that a balanced diet is very important. So I would recommend focusing first on nutritious foods that naturally contain protein, such as dairy products. And also, I would opt for protein-enriched foods. If I need a little protein boost, I would opt for protein-enriched foods that are nutritious, rather than reaching out for protein-enriched cookies or other nutrient-poor foods with added protein. And the other advice I would have is to spread your protein intake throughout the day, because there is a maximum amount of protein per meal that our body can handle, as I mentioned, and we can't really store excess protein consumed at any given time. So by spreading your protein intake throughout the day, you actually maximize the protein that you ingest so that nothing goes to waste. And I think that people should pay particular attention to breakfast, because protein is often consumed in abundance at dinner and neglected at breakfast. And yet breakfast is crucial for maximizing muscle mass, given that we're actually breaking our overnight fast with breakfast. So protein is really crucial in the morning. And it's also a good idea to consume protein 1 to 3 hours before bedtime to help support muscle synthesis and reduce muscle breakdown during our sleep. And I would say that the advantage of dairy products in that context is that they're very versatile. They can be consumed at any time of the day, from breakfast to lunch and dinner. They can be consumed as a snack or even before going to bed. I personally often have a glass of milk before bedtime.
So, where can a person find this information on how much protein they themselves should look to consume at mealtime?
Well, we do have a website that is dedicated for consumer information. It's whatyoueat.ca, and people can find a lot of information on protein. They can obtain tips on how to incorporate more protein into their meals, and we also have recipes there that include dairy products.
Well, this is all great information, Isabelle. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the Canadian Podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
After the break, Andrew will ask a few more questions to another nutritionist, but this time we're staying on the cow topic in terms of what we feed our cows and their protein needs. So stay right here. We'll be right back.
Strong and free. It's not just in our anthem, it's in who we are. A freedom to choose what's best for us. That's why Canadian dairy farmers uphold some of the highest standards in the world, proudly helping to strengthen our communities. When you choose Canadian, you're making all of us stronger.
That's the Canadian way.
Our next guest is the Director of Strategic Marketing and Technology for Ruminants with Trow Nutrition Canada. It's Sebastien Decap. Welcome to Canadian Podcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Andrew. Happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you because we have been talking a lot about protein. And Sarah just finished up the conversation talking about what that means on the consumer side. I think it's really important to bring it now to the farm to talk about just what it does mean for us as producers trying to take advantage of that demand and trying to meet that demand for consumers. Obviously, there's the explosion of the protein rich foods. It's a trend that is significant. It continues to grow. And as such, we obviously have through the pricing changes are being encouraged for production to shift a bit on the component side to increase that protein side. I guess I'm kind of curious in terms of, would you describe this as a major shift on the farm, considering that, I mean, since my dad started farming, it was all about butterfat.
You're right. So I think it's a major shift. That's true. As you described before, we have seen that consumers want more and more protein. So there is a lot of products that claim high protein, and that products are premium products. And also we have seen a lot of new drugs that need high protein levels, drugs for lose weight. So of course there is a shift and a big shift. But the question is for how long this will be, because as you mentioned, your grandpa think about kilos of fat, and we have based it on a system that is a quota-based system of kilos of butter fat. So I think we need to keep thinking about kilos of butter fat now with the issue that, now the consumers want more protein. And that's true. Consumers want more protein, and we need to start to increase protein, but the most important thing is that we need to be able to fill the quota, to have the kilos of butterfat, and after that, let's start to think about protein and about this major shift and what we'll be doing to increase the protein content without losing the kilos of butterfat.
Yeah, so without losing that. So I guess then, in practical terms, what does that change mean, knowing that pricing is shifting to something that's a little more heavily weighted towards the protein component?
That's really important. So I think first of all, we have to see which our base scenario. So where we are, because it's different if my starting point is 3.2% of protein, is different that my starting point is 3.5% of protein. And then also it's different if my cows are producing 32 kilos of milk or 50 kilos of milk. So let's start to see where the opportunities are. The other practical thing is that now we start to look more in the ratio between protein and other solids and butter fat. So that ratio now is more important. So then producers are starting to look at more that ratio. So the question is, it's possible without losing kilos of butter fat to increase that ratio and increase that protein? And that's the big thing that we have to answer first. And then the other important thing is I'm doing the basis. There is a lot of basic things on terms of management that are really important that also increase protein content. Probably we will talk about and discuss about that, but it's everything about the rumen, about health, rumen healthy, and also about some management and consistency. So cows really like consistency. So if we are doing the basic right first, then we can build to go a little bit further for increase the protein levels with a different practice or some more specific things.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because that is where I want to take the conversation is really what can we do about it? Because as you talk about that, my personal instinct on this farm is I am filling quota with the fat I want, so I don't really want to bring that down suddenly to shift the ratio. My instinct is I want to increase the protein. So I guess, if we start on the diet side of things and look at the herd's diet, where can I start, or am I on the right track of wanting to just increase protein as my first instinct?
That's good. So the first thing is that what drives protein is energy. So don't try to increase protein with more protein because that's not how it works, the system. If we have energy, if we are able to fulfill the energy levels, that is a the major driver for protein. Second thing, the most competitive way and cheapest way of maximize protein is through microbial protein. So the protein that is produced in the rumen. So I need high levels, I need energy for that, and I need a rumen that is working perfectly to maximize this microbial protein. The microbial protein is the cheapest source of protein and could feel like around 60% of the total protein, and the amino acidic profile is pretty similar to the protein in milk. And then I should look at the best ways of supplementation of protein in terms of bypass. So use an excellent source of protein, of bypass protein, ensure that I have the bypass capacity to go on top of the microbial protein, because I don't want to replace microbial protein by bypass protein. So that's the other thing. And the last thing that I think also it's really, really important is to look at all the transition period and make sure that the cows will be very healthy, because also if the cows is sick, the protein will compete and they will go for the immune system and they'll go to some challenges. So also that will drop protein. So there is a few things that are really important. And for me, but the most important thing is energy. So protein is derived by energy, maximize microbial protein, and then use an excellent source of bypass protein to maximize the protein in milk.
So then, in terms of some of that management stuff and transition, I do want to get to that in a second. But if we sit on this, diet for a second here and look at what that balance looks like, what I'm hearing, more energy is going to feed those microbial proteins. They'll kind of do the heavy lifting for it. Is there kind of an optimal, recipe that you see in terms of the balance from, forage to energy? Is it a case of, bringing down some of the fiber component and just increasing the energy, or is my guess is it's far more complicated than that, Sebastian.
You are totally right. So first of all, there is not any silver bullet. There is not a magic recipe. And there is a lot of things that we can do, but we need to make sure that we will, make the rumen function well. Because as you mentioned, of course, we can drop fiber, so we can create kind of subacute acidosis. So we will drop fat, it will increase protein, we will get the butter fat, the ratio better, but at the end, we will lose milk at some point. For me, one of the most important things is that we don't talk too much about that, is the efficiency use of nitrogen. So the cow is an animal that is not very efficient to use nitrogen, and the efficiency use of nitrogen can go from 20 to 40% or even 45%, but most of the cows are not more than 30%. What literature have seen is that if you increase the efficiency use of nitrogen, you also will get more protein in the milk. So, and also I can provide not very high diet with high protein diet. So if I can work increasing the efficiency use of nitrogen, balancing the nitrogen in the rumen with the source of energy, so the energy will help to capture this nitrogen and create more microbial protein. That is a really, really good way and very cheap to increase the protein in the milk, and it's very cheap. So higher efficiency use of nitrogen, it's higher protein, and also is you save a lot of money because you are not wasting the nitrogen in the urine. And the other thing is the source, as you mentioned, like source of energy and starch. So if I have more available starch and better source of energy that can capture that nitrogen, also I will increase my protein level. So a lot of studies are showing that you can keep the protein levels but increase starch levels with a healthy rumen, and then you can increase also protein in milk. So for me, that's very important topics. And of
Well,
course,
you're
digestibility of the forage, maximize digestibility of the forages.
Yeah. Well, I think you're speaking to a lot of farmers if you're talking cheap. What's the cheapest way we can do this
Yeah.
to try to increase this? And it goes to, because it's actually interesting to hear your perspective on that, because that is different than what I would say a lot of the conversation has been in our neighborhood anyway, because a lot of the focus, or a lot of the conversation has been around playing with amino acids. I think that's one of those things that is kind of the thing that if I talk to another dairy farmer, that's the thing they're trying to play with, with their nutrition team. So I guess I'm curious, does amino acids and playing with them have a role, or is it kind of a more expensive role than what you're suggesting with, kind of balancing out what a little more energy?
Yeah. So I'm really believer and that we should balance on amino acids. So that's first of all. So we are in trial. We have been balancing by amino acid from a long term, from a long time ago, and I really think that models need to balance by amino acid, because at the end, the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So also what literature have shown is that you can feed with less crude protein if you balance by amino acids, because you are meeting the requirements, and this is precision nutrition. So yeah, I think amino acid play a big role, and balancing by amino acid is really extremely important, because also you increase efficiency use of nitrogen. So if you balance by amino acids, you will lose less nitrogen, so more amino acid will go to the mammary gland, that are the building blocks of the protein in milk. Saying this, the different discussion is, should I supplement with amino acids? And that's it, a different discussion, because what we have seen that if we really have a rumen working healthy and maximizing microbial protein and supplement with excellent source of bypass protein, in not all the cases we need to supplement with specific amino acids. There is some case that yes, but there is some cases that not. And sometimes I need to see the whole picture, because one thing is the income, that will be the amount of protein and milk and what I'll get paid for that. But the other thing is the cost. So it's always important to keep in mind which will be the income over the feed cost of those strategy. If my income over the feed cost is higher, that's great. Let's do that. Let's do that strategy. But if I'm supplementing and this doesn't pay the bills, yeah, it's not a good strategy. So let's have the whole picture. But generally speaking, I think we need to balance the diet by amino acids.
Well, I really like that perspective in terms of doing that income over feed, kind of report, probably ahead of doing any changes and then post doing any changes, just to be able to get, that much more information when trying to make those long-term decisions. Because that definitely is one of those things that will have the impact. You talked a little bit in terms of, rebalancing the ration too much one way. Maybe we get a little milk early on, but that cow crashes afterwards. What are some of those other unintended consequences or things we really have to watch for when we are rebalancing, whether it's with, fiber, energy, amino acids, bypass proteins, all of the components that are playing a role here?
So for me, one important concept is that, as we mentioned, we don't get more protein feeding more protein because we have the rumen and we create microbial protein. So if I overfeeding with protein and I'm not balancing by energy requirements and energy levels, what will happen is we will lose that protein via nitrogen in the urine. So we'll have a consequence not only for the environment, but also for the cow. So we will not have a healthy cow. The problem with this is that we will have some repro problems, also healthy issues, drop dry matter intake. So we need to be very careful just not to overfeeding protein. And the other thing that you also describe is that I can go for more energy, that's true. Drop a little bit of fiber, that's true. But that's also could be a risky strategy because if the rumen is not working healthy, and I'm dropping too much in fat, that is indication that I have a problem, probably acidosis, and that will also compromise the overall health of the cow. And also at the end, it will drop the milk production. So we can have repro problems, we can have drop in milk production. So we need to be really careful about those strategy and not do something too, a big change because could be worse.
Which we certainly don't want. And you did mention, the challenge of, that nitrogen going through to the urine, the environmental impact that it can have. That obviously is, both something we don't want to have and a nutrient that we fed that is then, wasted and those dollars thrown away. Do we have any other environmental impacts or impacts that we have to watch for when some of those nutrients bypass through the cow and, kind of do end up on the manure side versus the milk side?
That's a good point because I think we have a really good opportunity from environmental impact. As I mentioned before, if we increase the efficiency use of nitrogen, we have less nitrogen in the environment. So what I want to say is that we don't need to overfeed protein. We can keep levels of protein low based on supplementation of amino acid. And now, because all we are very worried and careful about increased protein, we will be more careful also about efficiency use of nitrogen. So if I improve the efficiency use of nitrogen from 28 to 32, for example, that nitrogen will go to the milk. So it will be less nitrogen in their urine or in the feces. So for me, this is a really great examples of synergy between sustainability, but also efficiency and real impact on the profitability of the farmer. So for me, this could be more than a challenge. For me, it's a really good opportunity how we can improve.
That's a win-win, I would say.
That's
so
true.
definitely something that's music to my ears, Sebastian. You mentioned, so we've talked a lot about diet. I do want to touch on the management side before I let you go. What are some of those kind of management strategies, a farmer like me can kind of look at in terms of trying to help build that, whether it's through the transition period, whether other stages through their lactation that could bring some benefit to that ratio?
Yeah. So for me, the most important thing is consistency. So try to do every single day same thing. So cows really like consistency and the same things every single day. So feed bank management, it's really important. Like look at refusal, try to have less sorting. So really ensure that the cow is eating what I'm formulating. So try to mimic exactly what I formulate, what the cow is really eating. So all this management practice in the bank to maximize and decrease and increase precision and accuracy of feeding are really, really, really important. And the other thing, as you mentioned also, is that any challenge, any inflammation, any issue that is happening into the cow will need protein to fight against those challenges. So there is some receptors that decide if the amino acids are going to milk protein or the amino acids are going to immune system. So if we have challenge and diseases, of course these amino acids will go or protein will go to immune system, so I'll have less protein to produce milk protein. So I know that it's look like okay, it's the same, but It is really like it's if we have a really healthy cow, if we have a really good feedback management, and we ensure that the basics are covered, then the cows will do her job and will maximize microbial protein.
Now, I know you mentioned that there is no silver bullet. However, I am going to challenge a little bit to say what's the best piece of advice you really could. As we do wrap up this conversation, Sebastian, I am really curious to know, we've given producers, you've given me a lot of information in terms of what I can tackle, but if there is, kind of one thing you want me to make sure I keep in mind, going into this, new challenge that I know I and lots of dairy farmers are up for in terms of trying to meet that demand for protein, what is that best piece of advice?
Okay, so I think we are in an area that we have a lot of data. So for me, the most promising things, and it's not something that now farmers can do, but we are working on that, is to try to use better the big amount of data that we have. So, for example, we have been thinking from a long time how to predict what is happening inside the cow. So what is happening with all the nutrients inside the cows, and predict what will happen, what will be the output. So we call that mechanistic models. Like is try to see really what is happening inside the cow. What we are doing now is try to think a little bit more out of the box and say, okay, let's more than predict what is happening inside the cows and base it on the requirements of the cows. Let's try to think more in the response, in the marginal response. So I have a feed, and I have which is an input, and I have the output, which is the milk and the protein. So with all this amount of data that we have, let's try to predict better which will be the marginal response of those feeds and those inputs that I have. And I think that could be a really powerful tool to better predict the output of milk yield, but also milk protein and milk fat. So the message is, as soon as we are collecting more data, we are being able to use better that data, and using better that data, also we are trying to predict better this marginal response from the cow. So I know this is not maybe a silver bullet that the farmers can make now, but the intention and the advice is, let's use the data and let's make the data talk about how can I do better and make better decisions. And also look at what it's working in other scenarios, because there is some maybe farmers that are doing other stuff that are working. So look at the data of others and look at how can I implement in my farm. Let's say bypass protein, specific source of really good bypass protein, or a really good source of starch. So it depends. But at the end, let's try to make the data talk.
Well, it sounds like great advice, and certainly all the elements that you've talked about with us today, Sebastian, are great pieces that I think each one of us as dairy producers can bring back to our farm and hopefully take something into account. So we really appreciate all of the advice and the time today for joining us on the Canadian Podcast. Thanks very much, Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and happy to discuss this in really important topics.
Well, certainly the shift towards protein is changing how all of us producers are managing everything from feeding to obviously managing the herd. And it's about more precision, more efficiency, not just necessarily producing more. At the same time, the shift definitely reflects what consumers are looking for, what they're going to continue to look for. And it's actually really exciting that what they are looking for is high quality, nutritious dairy protein. So what's happening on the farm is closely tied to the demand in the grocery store. We're going to continue this conversation about protein in our next episode with experts from Lactanet. But in the meantime, make sure you give us a follow on Blue Sky, X, Facebook, or YouTube. or you can also drop us a note at podcast@canadianpodcow.ca. Thanks to our sponsor, the Dairy Farmers of Canada, and a huge thanks to our production team, Bruce Sargent and Carl Belanger. On behalf of my co-host Sarah Sash and everyone here at the Pod Cow, thanks for listening. I'm Andrew Campbell. We'll see you next time.